afternoon. David and I are out here. We are in the wind. If you look on the satellite image, dirty water everywhere, but we are looking and finding water that's clean. It's way up in the marsh in these little lakes up here. And so this is our target strategy to find trout on a day like this. And it's working. There's some trout here. Most of the fish have come today on a chartreuse colored bait, really on a popping cork, but had some fish and some action on a swim bait that was a darker colored. So we're going to see what this chartreuse one does.
Good time. That's a nice trout.
That's a nice trout. This is 16-inch you were talking about a second ago.
These are redfish, John. This is a nice, if it's not a redfish, that's a nice trout. No.
Nice trout.
Swallowed it good too. Well,
wow, that's a beauty there.
Put in my
That's
order.
close to a 20-inch. If you watched my last video, you know that I was waiting for the trout to come up in the shallow water ponds. Well, I'm glad to say that this last weekend they came up. When David and I went out to look for them, we found them in plenty, and we found some nice sized ones as well, somewhat that would be maybe even 3 years old. So really great to see. You know, I love this environment. It's very shallow. We're fishing in ponds that are 2 to 3 feet deep, and this particular day was not a nice calm wind day. It was still 15 knots. You know, we've had a lot of wind, but as the days progress, we're going to start getting into these still mornings where there's a blanket of cloud over top of you. It's very still in there. Water is still. There's wildlife moving around. There's a lot of fish activity, and of course the best thing are those top water blow-ups. So maybe you're wondering where to find these ponds. Well, I'm going to tell you a couple things about the ponds. I'm not going to tell you exactly where I was fishing, but I'm going to tell you about the type of ponds that I'm fishing in. You can find them yourself. But you want ponds with clean water. So if they have clean water, that means there's a couple of characteristics about them that might separate them and make them unique. For one thing, they're not in the big tidal flow area where a lot of water moves through the marsh and through them to get in and out. That's a recipe for dirty water. A lot of sediment carried, and it's going to be dirty. So they're kind of isolated. They're sort of on one end, so maybe the upper end of where the tidal water would flow back and forth, so they don't carry all that water. And also, they're probably going to have grass in them. And by grass, I mean submerged aquatic vegetation. So in these cases, they're going to have widgeon grass in the areas that I'm fishing. We just don't have the eel grass there, even though the salinity range would be fine for eel grass, but eel grass just isn't there. So widgeon grass is better than nothing. It still creates a good habitat up in there. So you're going to be running into some of that grass, and you may even see grass beds in some areas. There's even some little ridges and islands in these ponds, and especially those bigger trout, you're going to find them up around the grass, maybe where you've got a little ridge and you've got a nice growth of widgeon grass across that ridge. You're going to find those bigger trout there. Now you also want to fish these ponds when the water's up, because they're going to be shallow. They're even at high water, they're maybe 3 feet deep, but they could be 2 feet deep. So you don't want to go when the water's been drained out of the marsh by north winds. It's not the best time. You want to allow some time. You get all that south wind pushing a lot of water up into the marsh, so you get a bit of excess water in there. It really draws in the trout. And so this means that you don't have to fish on a falling tide like we often like to do in the fall. Now the days are bringing, during the day you're going to have a lot of rising tide, and that's fine, that's perfect, because that's pushing all that water up into these shallow ponds. And the water temperature is also going to be like in the low 60s, above 60 degrees, 60 up into the mid to upper 60s. After that, they're probably not going to be there anymore. So you can use water temperature as kind of a gauge to tell you whether you expect to find trout there or not. Now, you know, my feeling is that the trout have somehow sensed that it's not going to get dangerously cold anymore, that the winter has somewhat passed and the water temperatures are staying around 60 degrees or above, so they can go into these shallow lakes without the risk of getting stuck in there should there be a rapid drop in water temperature, and then get stun death, end up being what they call stun death, where they get the metabolism drops so low they become immobilized, and then they'll just die. Just a little weight in body swim bait from Voodoo Shrimp, the Vixen. Got a nice green and purple color scheme. So what are the trout eating in here? So I know they're eating finfish because I can see some of the finfish around. They respond very well to the types of baits that you would expect them to hit if they're feeding on finfish, like the top water, so that's kind of like a mullet imitation, other swim baits, paddle tail swim baits. They're hitting all that. But I also suspect that they're starting to eat the small shrimp. Now the brown shrimp have come into the inner marshes, places like this, and they are developing in there. They came in post larva, and now they're growing to juveniles. And as they will start coming away from the shorelines into these shallow lakes, they'll be hanging around in the widgeon grass beds, and they're going to be growing. They will eventually start moving from the small inner lakes to the larger lakes, and then on out into the bays and the sound to breed later on in the spring and early summer. But for now, they're really small in there, but I suspect that that is some of the food that the trout are finding in these inner shallow marsh lakes. I was also very happy to see some larger fish. We caught a couple of 19-inch fish, were the large size that we caught.
We're gonna run up on a little.
Feels like a decent fish. Oh yeah. That's a good. These may be 2 or 3 year old fish, so very glad to see them in there. But this is characteristic of what I find in the end of February, end of February, the start of March, in these inner marsh lakes. They'll hold some very nice trout. You would really be surprised if you're not fishing this kind of environment. I think you'll be very surprised how big the fish in there can get. And I lost a couple of them. I had a lot of blow-ups on a topwater bait that I didn't get the hookup, which I think were all larger fish as well.
Oh, mackerel. Top water?
Yep, that's a fish there.
Man,
That's a good fish. Oh, I got a
foul hook.
Yeah. Okay.
He hit it good, though.
Not a bad fish, but
No.
not the huge one that I thought would have been.
It sure struck like it.
Yeah, he really hammered it. The One Knocker Junior, Spook Junior. Like I said before, this is a wonderful time to have that topwater experience. Those blow-ups you get in a shallow lake with sizable trout hitting that topwater bait. And I'm fishing things like One Knocker, like Spooks or Spook Juniors, She Dogs, something like that. Dave and I were both fishing the Spook Junior One Knockers. And this particular day was a little bit too rough to fish top water effectively. There was the waves kept pushing the bait around. It was hard to get a nice walk the dog action, and the fish, when they hit it, didn't seem to be able to lock on too well. They seemed to be just hitting the bait up in the air, and they were flying out of the water. The bait was flying out of the water. It was really a fun sight, but I only got one hook up where I actually could land the fish, but I had quite a few blow ups, probably some very nice fish. So I'm waiting. It won't be too long before I'll have still mornings to fish, and then it's just heaven. That still water, walking that bait across the water, and seeing and hearing that explosion from below, that big trout hitting the bait. So I hope you can get in here and try some of this action yourself. Do be careful, it's shallow in there, and if you have a large draft boat, you got to be careful. You may end up getting stuck in there. But hey, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up, share it, and subscribe to my channel. And I will talk to you in a week or maybe two.